Okay, let's get over to our featured artist. This week I'm interviewing legendary jazz funk drummer Mike Clark. Mike Clark kind of rose to national, international recognition back in 1974 as a member of Herbie. I guess it might have been before that, but he appeared on Herbie Hancock's record, Thrust, legendary band. He joined the Headhunters tour, so it must have been before that when the record with Harvey Bass and Mike joined for the tour. And so he's worked with Herbie for a number of years, several records. Then the Headhunters branched off on their own thing, starting in '75. He's been on record with Eddie Henderson, Brand X. I'm just going through his credits now. It's pretty crazy. His own bands. Gosh, where else do we go here? So many. Jeff Berlin, Charlotte Moffett. He has a project with Michael Wolff. And then this year, the Headhunters put their first record out in, I believe, about 10 years. So this is about their 50th year. The new record is called Speakers in the House. It's a really, really cool record. It's got some classic Mike Clark kind of broken 16th note funk stuff. It's got a swing version of Actual Proof. There's some African influence stuff. There's some New Orleans stuff in there. And then there's some production kind of cool things where they're, cutting and pasting and doing some kind of more modern production techniques. Mike sounds great, as always. He's always a fun hang. So let's get to it with Mike Clark. 50 years with the Headhunters, huh?
Yeah.
Now, I didn't realize the band had been around that long until I went back and looked at the date of the Herbie record. So my first question is, what made you guys decide to keep going once the Herbie band was over?
I think what happened was we were kind of all doing our own thing. And, I'm like a bebop guy, so I went way into it, which is what I was doing before Herbie. So I was kind of settled and happy. And Bill Summers and I somehow or another ended up talking just to say hello. And then he said, hey, man, there was a lot of bad vibes and bad blood in the old band. I won't go into all that because it seems silly now at this age. But he was like, we sort of all left on a weird note. What if we did it once and see what happens? And I'm like, yeah, I'm always cool to work. And I love playing with Bill. And so we did. He called, I went down to New Orleans to his house. And Donald Harrison came over, who lived in the neighborhood, to do something. I forget what Donald was doing there. Obviously, they were going to do some kind of project or a gig. And well, hell, let's ask Donald, man. He's fantastic, as you know. And okay, and so we called Paul Jackson. And I had a manager already. I was on the road with another thing called Prescription Renewal, which is my own band with Scarrick, Charlie Hunter, Robert Walter, DJ Logic, and a bunch of guys. So I said, well, man, maybe we can make something happen here. So the manager I had booked us some Headhunters gigs. Bill reached out to a couple of agents. We went to Europe. We made a couple of records. And then, we ended up, Donald would call and say, hey, you guys want to play Jazz Fest, or do you want to do a spot on Treme, or do you want to do this or that? And then more gigs. And then I would go down to New Orleans maybe to play a jazz gig at Snug Harbor. And then I'd say, well, what the hell, let's just do a Headhunters gig. And then one thing led to another. So on and on and on. And we just kept going. And then we've had some times where we were seriously busy with the Headhunters, and then somehow we'd all go back to our lives and nothing would happen for like 6 or 8 months. And pretty soon, hey, some guy called from Europe, wants us to blah, blah, blah. You want to do it? Yeah, okay, let's do it. And we've had a million great guys come through the band, not really permanent members, but we've had Fred Wesley play with us, and we've had Scarrick play with us, and all kinds of guys. But this Jerry Z, the great organ player, has played with us, and still some on and off does play with us. And then I guess about a year or so ago, we had played with Kyle Roussel and Chris before, and we played with those guys and Chris Severin and on bass, and we said, "Man, this is pretty fat. This really works because Chris can play totally. He's a jazz cat as well as a funk guitar, and he can play all kinds of creative, crazy bass stuff like right on the spot, make it up right on the spot. He can turn on a dime." So Donald is completely amazing artist. I mean, his depth and his knowledge it's intimidating. I mean, this guy can play bebop, post-bop, funk. He can sing African, Afro-Cuban. He's played with all the great Latin stars. He's played with Miles and Tony and Elvin and Art Blakey. And, I mean, at length, he knows these cats really well. He didn't just stop by and play a few tunes, And he writes. Once we were in Russia together, and he wrote a symphony with no keyboard. Just he heard it in his head and wrote it down and had it performed several times. No keyboard. He just heard the notes and wrote. I was there. So So I love playing in this band. It just keeps getting deeper and weirder and more out and more strange and more funky and more soulful, and everybody. Finds a way to play together, like in this situation, because it's not a jazz gig, but it's not exactly a funk gig either, and it's certainly not a fusion type, meaning all of those lines like Mahavishnu. It's not that. It's on the soul side. So anyway, we just kept going. Then we met Devil Hill Management. We met those cats. And they're like, "Hey, let's do something with the Headhunters and see what's up." And then we had this record. Am I rambling? I have had a big cup of coffee right before.
Keep going, man.
I can just stop me anytime. I want like some kind of stream of content. But anyway, while we were on the road some time ago, we ended up doing this gig in a ship that was docked. The nightclub was an old ship that no longer sailed. It was pretty amazing, and the club was down. You walk down into the hold of the ship, and there was a nightclub. And the guy said, "I have a facility to record and kitchens and living space. It's beautiful. It's right on the dock. You guys can record there." We had Reggie Washington with us on bass, the great Reggie Washington, who had played in Branford's band and many bands, and he'd been living in Europe for some time. And Reggie and I were roommates during the old Harlem days uptown in New York, and so we knew each other. And Reg is great; he fit perfectly. So we made this record. Then we sort of put it in the can. Then somehow everybody went back to their lives, and I started doing my jazz thing, and Bill was doing his thing. He had Los Hombres Caliente, and this and that, and Donald was doing everything. And sort of the record, we still did some touring, but the record was sort of on hold. And then when we met Greg and Craig from Devil Hill, they said, "Well, what do you got in the can?" And we said, "Well, this." So we needed to fix it up a little bit, and kind of, it wasn't completely finished, the record. So I went over to Jerry Z's house. He's got a studio in his house, and we recorded a piece called Vaspuricon. And then we edited a few things, and we had Donald put some horn parts here and there as he saw fit. We all wrote together the pieces, except for Actual Proof, which Hancock wrote, of course. And but we played Actual Proof, but I said, let's play it like with an Elvin style lope. Let's not play it like dun 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 dun. And every time I hear a fusion band play Actual Proof, they play it so fast that it's not funky. And of course, everybody unloads everything they know how to play. And I'm like, let's not do that. Let's swang-a-lang, baby, and make it real groovy. So I love this arrangement. We had Stephen Gordon on piano at that time. And we did some pretty intense stuff. Congo Square, which has some strange sounding African instruments. One African instrument I've never even heard of before. And I think it's a pretty, I think there's something in there for everybody. I actually, as an artist, we barely, you listen to a record a lot when you mix it and you never listen to it again, pretty much, unless somebody plays it or you hear it on the radio, or every once in a while you dig it out. But I've been kind of enjoying listening to this one, like when I'm cleaning the house and doing stuff, which I don't normally do that. So some people likes this record.
That's a good sign. How does the band, you said you write together. What does that mean? Does it start as an impromptu groove? I mean, how does the
Yeah.
process start?
Well, a couple of different. Let's see. In this last version, if you will, of the band, how it. Well, sometimes somebody will sing a line or sing something or have an idea or say, "Hey, man, you remember that there's a blues lick that goes like this," or Donald will just come in with damn near a whole thing. Or Bill and I will start with a rhythmic underlay and make suggestions, and Kyle, Chris, somebody will start putting their part on there, and then somebody will either sing or play or make up a line. But we're kind of all do this together. Sometimes, but very seldom does a guy walk in with a whole thing already done.
Mm-hmm.
At least on this record,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And plus, it was piecemeal the way we did it. We're all in different towns and this, that, and the other. So it wasn't exactly like we all were together and on the road and we wrote and arranged and everything. This kind of went down all in the studio, and it was all on the fly because we're all pretty busy with our solo careers, like for real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you played much of this material on gigs, and have they evolved?
Yeah, we just played SF Jazz, and we played a place called Nectar's in Portland. I think it was either Seattle or Portland. I can't remember. It was only a couple of weeks ago. um, anyway, Seattle. Anyway, so I think so. We have played the material also at the Keystone in Baltimore and a little bit in Europe. So we've dabbled and we keep and tweaking. But on this last gig that we played, it seemed to have a jazz-like breakthrough. I mean, that word is weird to use, jazz, like splang, blang, a lang. I don't mean that. What I'm trying to say is like there was a lot of interplay, but it seemed to organize itself. Nobody was stepping on each other. Nobody was trying to play this way or that way. It organically found its way and turned into something that, in my humble estimation, was really interesting. At least for me, it was. I found it really interesting, and I'm the kind of drummer that, unless it's really a conversational. It's not that interesting. I don't mind playing straight pocket, especially if I'm getting paid or if there's somebody singing some real nasty funk.
Mm-hmm.
But just to play pocket with a bunch of jazz musicians improvising and I'm back there chopping with you, I got to really get a good payday to do that at this age and at this point. I'd rather be like Elvin and Train or Tony and Miles and speak to each other and make a collage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what the beat is, whether it's swing, funk, rock, whatever they want to do. So if I'm going to play with some guys and it's not just going to be to make rent, then I want to do something at this age that I find interesting for me. I don't care what other drummers and everybody thinks. I'm way past all that now. So it's a personal investment in whatever remaining time I have left on the dirt ball.
Right.
I'm in it.
Do you have to shift your mindset at all when you go from more of a straight ahead setting to this band, or is it all? It sounds like the language is interwoven, but I'm just curious. Do you have to kind of dust off your funk chops at all?
No, I mean, I definitely can't play swing stuff. I have to play some kind of funky or whatever you want to call it, eighth note or 16 or whatever the numbers are, beat. So you can't play splang-a-lang. Sometimes we do. It can go there. But most of the music is not. So that's the only part. Now, see, I don't have fusion or the language I play is all bebop and post-bop, all from Max Roach, even from Gene Krupa until now. Chick Webb, whatever you want to say. He's the guy. And we're all playing his stuff, no matter who you are, even if you don't know who the guy is. So anyway, um, uh, but yeah, none of my stuff is like, I don't do any of that. I'm not interested in that. I do like to hear other drummers do that. I think it's great. I'm like,
Hmm.
wow, listen to that. But me, all my language comes from if you jazz, Duke Ellington, all of it till now. Coltrane, Sonny Rollins. I've listened to his, you know, I'm 76 years old. I've been playing since I'm 5. My father was a jazz drummer, so I've been listening to straight ahead acoustic, you know, forever. So that's my language. And I guess what made it unique for Hancock, possibly, is when I play funk, I use, instead of playing quote unquote fills, I play that stuff. And people in the 70s hadn't really heard that before. I had thought
Hmm.
of that when I was, I don't know, 14. That wasn't new for really. That was like my generation. It was like, hey, you know, what else? I mean, we didn't play rock in high school when I was a kid or anything like that. We played some form of swing music or big band or whatever. So I just put that stuff. And so for me, I guess it's a long answer to that question is no, there's not a big. The volume can make a difference. If the volume's too much for me, then the type of then I have to resort to some. And I find that shit boring, man. I'd rather
Hmm.
hear some other guy play drums like that. That's not what I do. I dig Billy Joe and Elvin and all that. I mean, period.
Now, back when you were kind of developing this vibe, was it a deliberate decision? Let me throw this bebop stuff in funk, or I mean, how did you get to that point? And then were there people that were like, "What are you doing, man? Could you just play a beat?"
Yeah, all of that. Yeah. Well, if you have to deal with culturally Beaver and Wally, they're going to be it's too much, it's too loud. But I mean, so yeah, I ran into that shit. Yeah, but Herbie and those cats are like, I hear you, bro. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? They heard it. It wasn't all that deep anyway. I mean, God, it wasn't rocket science. But yeah, like how did I develop it? I was on an organ gig for 4 years when I was young, and then was farming out to a million jazz bands, and people were starting to play Horace Silver type funk and Mercy Mercy Cannonball. So I'd be on an organ gig where you primarily played mostly swing and shuffles and some boogaloo. So us younger guys got tired of Boogaloo and tried and started jacking it out and sci-fiing it and trying to do stuff to it. So my thing was when I played Mercy Mercy, I started adding all the ghost notes, and then I thought, well, a double stroke roll, 2 on each, or single, or paradiddles. I could do that on the hi-hat and 1 on the snare and fill in with the bass drum. And then I took a lot of Philly Joe stuff and a lot of Elvin and Tony stuff and just took bits and pieces of it and made beats out of it. And which is kind of what was going to go that way anyway. And I remember the first time I heard Garibaldi, him and I were both shocked because we were both in a similar direction. And so from those organ gigs and playing the jazz gigs, I started doing that stuff. And no, actually, nobody gave me a bunch of gas about it. Everybody was like, "Yeah, what is that? That's really cool." And of course, then there was Paul Jackson and Paul was my very best friends. We were criminals together, and like we did all kinds of antics, girlfriends, hanging out, drinking, what have you. Besides just playing, and we had a million bands together. And he played upright bass, and we played with Woody Shaw and Bobby Hutcherson and Joe Henderson and all these cats. And Paul worked at Sherman and Clay Music Store. He was a manager as well. And he brought we had a music room in this place we rented, and he brought an electric bass that sat in the corner for about 2 years, a Fender Precision. And one day he said, play that weird funky stuff you do, that upside down funk thing. And I did, and he put those bass lines to it right away. He took the bass out of the case and played it. And the first thing I said to him was, man, if you're going to play bass like that, we need to hire a bass player. Because he played every 16th note, man, he told me two words, and I think you know what they were. I mean, and so we started hiring out. We started our own little band based on that. We had so much fun doing it, and it became real popular in the Bay Area. We started playing with everybody, and pretty soon I'm up there with an electric bass instead of the acoustic bass. Which now that was a big change for me, and still can be weird for me. Because if you try to swing with electric bass, it's real fat, the notes are real thick, and it's hard on the ride cymbal. But for funk, it's cool, unless they turn it up too loud, which to me always destroys the groove. And you can't play any ghost notes or any hip stuff with that going on. You just have to slug out a 2 and 4, which I have students 13 that can do that really well. So that answer all that. Oh yeah, the other thing is too much or too busy. Like I say, in Oakland, it was like a soulful excursion going on there. But every once in a while, I'd end up on Wally or Beaver's gig, and when I did, they'd be like, "I think that's so awful busy, or it's loud, or it's too much. Where's one?" And I'd be like, "It's after 2, bro." And like it's before 2 and after 4. Like it's really, I mean, God, please do some homework. But not too much of that. Most of the guys I played with were extremely great. I was lucky. Most of them were jazz cats that decided to play funk because it became popular, and we all needed to work. The work and rent is the 2 words.
Right.
I would have been still just played bebop till the day I rolled over in the grave. It's pretty much what I'm doing now, except for the heads.
I want to come back to the Oakland scene, but first, you just mentioned that about the bass sound, and before we got on, you were talking about that cymbal behind you. So choosing gear that fits the gig, what is your philosophy? What's your concept for that?
Well, because we can't afford to fly our instruments anymore or take our own instruments, my concept is I have to play whatever drum set that they have. Now, here in New York, in jazz clubs, all the stuff is geared for jazz. All 18 two-headed bass drums, small toms, like a 8 by 12 and a 14 or whatever, or maybe 2 toms on the bass drum. You don't have a 22-inch bass drum with black dot or heads or whatever, pinstripes or bass drums with that rubber thing that won't let you, so it's all the jazz stuff here, so you don't have to sweat that. You go out on the road, man, you might have a cardboard box for a bit, you get all kinds of stuff like that. If I were to take my own drum for the Headhunters, I play my jazz kit, which is an 18-inch DW, 8 by 12, 14-inch. It's more than enough with now that you got monitors and all this stuff. I do put a little something like moon gel on the back of the bass drum head and tune it down slightly, but it's still, I use the jazz sound for everything. I do have a 22 that's been in storage for, I don't know, about 14 years. I just never take it out. I do like a 20-inch bass drum for the Headhunters, and you can't always, but if I use my drums, it's fine.
And so how do you decide, because some of the tracks, the snare's a little bit dampened and some of the tracks it's wide open. Like what determines that decision?
Well, the ones that may be wide open were done here in New York, and what determines that is the drum set that they have in the studio. And the stuff we did in Europe was a big bass drum, and you have to, I don't even know, it probably had a hole in the head in some, like a dead horse or cow inside of it to get that. When I do that to a bass drum, it doesn't even sound like a drum, it sounds more like a signal. But, rather than argue with an engineer or producer that doesn't understand a jazz sound, I just play what's there and do the right thing. Like if it's a 22, I'm not going to tune it up like an 18-inch bass drum, But I do like, I do like, how the bass drum sounded on those Motown records, man. The toms had 2 heads, they were tuned up, and the bass drum had that African sound to it. I love that, man. I mean, they knew how to record that stuff and make it right, So depending on the set, I'm not going to go against the grain at this age and this point. I'll try to do the most sensible thing for the record.
What do you look for in a ride cymbal?
Dark note and as much stick as I can get without having it be too tight.
Mm.
I don't like a lot of spread because if you're playing with trios, you don't want it like to roar everybody out of the room. I like a cymbal you can dig in. I'm from the old school, like the ice cream scoop on a cymbal. I like the dirty beat, dirty swing beat, and man, it's funny. I was in a car the other day driving, and Sugar came on the radio, and I was listening to that dude. I think his name is Billy Kay. I met him once. What a nasty ride beat that dude had on that record, man. You know what I mean? Like I was like, yeah, bro, you know. Uh, Turning that stick. And so I like a cymbal that's got that kind of back alley thing to it. I don't need all that high pitched polyester pingy stuff.
Mm, mm.
In my brain, that's how I feel. I hear other guys do it, and they can make it work. I can't. I'm not the kind of drummer that can play any drum set, any surface, any cymbal. I'm not that guy. You don't catch it like it's the drummer. It's not the equipment. That's bullshit, man. If you get a cymbal that just sounds awful, and it's like, how are you gonna play it, man? Or how am I'm maybe some other guy. That's fine with me. Let the guy, Mr. Know-It-All, play that cymbal. I'll play my stuff.
Right on.
That rap, I play any cymbal.
Mm.
I play any bass player. I don't care what, Yeah, I know, bro. John Wayne. I know you're bad, bro. I hear you. Believe me, I hear you. I know, right? All right, there's that. Anyway, what else you got for me? Where are you anyway?
I'm in Pittsburgh.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Not Crawford's Grill, huh?
Yeah, man. Well, that's not here anymore, unfortunately. But Roger Humphreys is still here playing his butt off.
Oh man, he's wonderful, man. Please tell him I said hi. I love him. Somebody interviewed him the other day. It might have been Jake Feinberg, and he was giving up some great stuff. Art Blakey and all the stuff he used to go here at Crawford Grill.
Yeah, right. Well, let's give a little bit of advice for if you see someone playing the actual proof beat these days. What criticism do you usually have, or what advice would you have for someone to get it a little bit better?
Like criticism is kind of opinion, even though I was the guy on the original. I mean, it's like, so I don't think that when guys play it too fast, I don't care for it personally. That doesn't mean it's not really done well. It's just, we were getting funky with that thing, man, and talking all in between the lines. We weren't trying to be like, it wasn't like a RPM. See how many RPMs we could crank out. It was like some grease, man. So I know what I like, but that doesn't mean that I need to, at this age, for me to, I don't need to talk about another guy unless the guy is not very good and he needs to, or unless he needs to grow and maybe I can help him. And even then I don't offer up too much. I would say play it how you feel it, man. I've heard a lot of guys play it, and I'm not going to mention names. Some guys, I like the way they do it better than others, for sure. You know who can play it to death is Tommy Campbell. He plays it better than I do. I love how Tommy Campbell, there's a video of Tommy Campbell playing actual proof out of all the guys I've ever heard do it. Yeah.
All right.
Own take on it, yet he kind of comes out of what we did, tip of the hat, some respect, and then he goes on and does his own. I was like, "Who's that cat?" Oh, it's Tommy. Oh my God!
Nice.
He understood it, man. He understood the funk in it. It wasn't about that's not it. That's not what we were thinking at all. It was more like our version. We were listening real close to each other. That's what it was. It was like. Tony used to talk to all of the guys in the early records. We weren't playing like those guys, but it was that role model, Elvin and Train, all those like real interactive bands where you just didn't play your stuff. You played it according to what everybody else, you were hearing the whole pie. And then with Hancock, he can really track you. He's listening to everything. He's like a computer, man. I mean, he can hear your every breath, and you're aware of that when you're playing. And then you become comfortable with him like that, and pretty soon you're doing it too. And that's what I learned from him. I always was in that direction anyway, but doing it with a guy like that, I honed it down a little bit, you know.
So go back to the Oakland thing. You mentioned Garibaldi, and I don't think I know the history on your relationship. Did you know each other, or did you meet as adults? Like, what's the connection, and then how the heck did you both sort of end up doing the same
First
type
of
of
all,
stuff?
well, I love David Garibaldi as a human being, and he's one of the greatest drummers ever. Well, here's what happened, the way I recall it, and you can ask him if this is correct, and his memory is probably better than mine. Just knowing David and knowing me. Okay, so there was a club called the On Broadway, and there was a band called the Reality Sandwich, and this tenor player named Vince Denham, a jazz musician, called me and said, "You want to play with this kind of rock funk band?" Runk. And I yeah, runk. Did I say that? I just kind of knew. Yeah, we were playing runk, man. So I'm like, yeah, hell yeah. $50 a night in those days, or 20, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll play. And it was like a Monday night or something like that. So I went in and I played. And I played a few things, and David Garibaldi, who I did not know from a can of paint, was sitting in the audience. And he came up to me and he said, "Hi, I'm David Garibaldi. I play with these guys sometimes too." And I wasn't psychologically, he said this to me, I wasn't psychologically prepared for what you just played, something I had played, not my entire scene, but I had done something. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. So I didn't even quite get what he meant. But I knew it was some complimentary. It was like I took him by surprise on something, but I had no idea what he meant. So, but I liked him instinctively. I liked him. I like, well, this guy's a smart guy. I liked him, just without hearing him play. So a few nights later, Paul Jackson and I went to the On Broadway, and we were in Jack London Square, which is where it was, and we went to have a drink. And there was a band in there playing, and it was the Tower of Power, and they were not famous. Nobody knew them, and there was only about 6 or 7 people in the club. And I'm like, hey, that's that guy that I met the other night playing drums up there, and they hadn't started yet. And I was checking out his drum set, and I could see the way the drums that he got. He had a Slingerland set with 2 tom-toms, a mounted tom and a floor tom, and he had a Chinese cymbal, and just the way he was set up, I was like, this cat is going to play something, but I had no idea what it was going to be. And man, these cats took off, and it blew my mind. The whole band was rocking, man, and David was knocking out that stuff. And in one way, we're completely different animals, of course. And in another way, we were on a similar path. So I think that's what he meant when he heard me. Because when I heard him, first of all, I was floored at how this man thought and played, and where he was putting things and where he was not putting things was brilliant. The beats were completely wonderful and innovative and new. And I could tell he'd been checking out Clyde and Purdy and Jabbo, and who Zig, and I was like, man, and this cat obviously can play jazz too, so there's something going on here. This cat is sophisticated, and I really dug it, but I also felt the same way he did. Like, well, I thought I was kind of the only guy on this path. Because I kind of got to it through a drummer named Ray Torres, a great, great drummer who passed away from Fort Worth, Texas. And this dude was busting up the 16th note in the triplet like Elvin style before anybody I ever heard in my life. So he was the guy that sort of triggered this thing up in my brain. Just he did it way different, and it wasn't a lot of ghosting like I do, but some more than I was used to hearing. And then I just sort of went mad with it because I already had this jazz background. I had chops, so I could play all this stuff. And then when I heard Garibaldi, I'm like, wow. And I told him, man, that was great. And we became friends. And then later we were linked in history together, which I'm honored because I think he's a brilliant artist.
Did you ever get together and play drums together, or do you just
No, we
exist?
haven't. No, but we've certainly discussed. We have a group of really wonderful drummers called the Stick People.
Hmm.
And it's Greg Orico, Michael Shreve, the great Lenny White, Dave Garibaldi, and myself. And we interview Larry. We so far, the Stick People, you can find us on YouTube or just stickpeople.com. We've interviewed Larry Graham. We've interviewed Stanley Clark. We've interviewed Dennis Chambers. We've interviewed so many guys I can't even think of it. The word is we're getting ready to interview Jack DeJohnette. I think I just heard, and we've Steve Jordan, not just drummers, but all kinds of folks, people who were writers for the scene, back in the day. Wonderful interviews and then we hang out with each other too. This was during COVID, so we talked a lot of trash before these interviews, so it's quite funny too, all of the different personalities. And these guys are all serious drummers and serious artists and people away from the drum set too.
Hmm.
So
Stickpeople.com, you said.
Stick People, yeah.
Nice.
Yes, the Stick People,
The
yeah.
Stick People.
Yeah,
What
and the interviews are, well, go ahead.
I was saying, I want to check them out. We'll put a link in the show notes to that as well, so people can find it.
Yeah, wonderful.
What does a practice session for you look like these days?
Well, let's see. If I have to read a lot of music, and I'm like kind of a C level reader, and I've been a C level reader since third grade. And I play in big bands, and I do tons of record dates. And it's like still, if I have to sit down and read method books along another drummer, I'm going to get my butt kicked. I studied with a great drummer here named Joe Bonadio, who really can play and really can read. And then COVID came and threw a wrench in that, and I've been lazy since then. But I have all the books that he. When I find my reading starting to get below, because I'm reading a lot. My band reading is like pretty good, and so I can take care of business if I have to, and do. But my math was poor in school. I've always had trouble with it, and no matter how much I practice the method books, counting and all of that is difficult for me. I'm a natural drummer. I taught myself. I've never had a drum lesson in my life. I taught myself how to play. As a child, I could just kind of play Gene Krupa stuff at 4 or 5 years old, and I just kept growing until now. But so I practice out of the books, and then if there's some jazz type Latin rhythms that I'm weak in or that I've been BSing all these years, I try to tighten that up. If there's something I don't know how to play, then I teach myself to play it. If somebody, I'm going to make a record and somebody sends me an incredibly difficult piece of music, then I shed it here in the room, by myself and figure it out. I work out a little bit on my pad, probably every day, just doubles, singles, and just to keep my hands up. I'm not, now what I do is also I just play, but I play different time periods. Like I'll play bebop drums, like all day and nothing but that. Or I'll play post-bop drums all day or something, or my own take on all of it. Phrases is what I'm trying to get at. I'm always trying to add language, the lexicon. I'm always trying to add phrasing and language and dialects and different things and different ways of turning a phrase and stuff like that. I find that more interesting than practicing one hand to a metronome to make my left hand as fast as my right and all that. I've been done with that kind of stuff for a long time. I do not discourage others to do that. It's just not where at one point, I remember I got all going on this, and I had my single stroke roll up to 112 or something, and it was fairly relaxed. And I could find no place on the kind of jazz gigs I do to play like this. Or I developed the one hand thing like Buddy Rich, just by watching TV, the finger, not the the push pull thing, and I find nowhere to do this kind of playing because if you're playing jazz and you're really in the moment, it's not going to be like, oh yeah, hold on, check this out. The tenor player is going to be like, what are you doing, man? So as an adult, I stopped doing a lot of those things.
Yeah, yeah.
Doesn't mean what it used to when I was 21 and go into a drum store and some guy's playing with one hand reel for doing some red, and I'd be like, wow, I must learn to do that. I don't know. Nah, not really. At one point, the music took over. And not the drums, but it became the music. And I realized, God, I could be playing another instrument. It's about the music for me. I love history. I'm always trying to watch documentaries. I'm getting ready to watch the Ron Carter documentary tonight. And I just watched a really good one on Louis Armstrong. I thought it was good on Apple TV. It's the latest one. And there's a lot of him telling the story in his own voice. So it's not some guy who didn't even know I'm telling the story. It's him, which I found that pretty cool.
I have to check that out. The Ron Carter one is amazing. I watched it last week.
Yeah, I heard it's fantastic. I can't wait. I know Lenny called me and was like, man, you got to watch. Lenny and I are, just for some trivia, we're movie friends. We have a Siskel and Ebert thing where we rate the movies. We go to the show together and have been doing this for many years.
What's your favorite recent non-music movie?
Well, it's a series, not a movie. Since COVID, Lenny and I went to a movie recently. What did we see? I forget what we saw, but something just recently. I can't remember, so it must not have blown my mind that heavy. But I've been watching a series called The Sinner on Netflix that I think is Bill Pullman smoking. I'm also watching Let the Right One In, a vampire movie, but it's not the coffin vampire of the old days. It's some high tech stuff that I'm digging, and I'm also watching Interview with the Vampire that I'm trying to figure out, do I really like this thing or not? But for some reason, I'm still watching it. I love to see New Orleans back in that time period and all of that. I have a connection with New Orleans. I don't feel like I play like those guys or any musical thing like that. I did play a lot there as a child, but just the city, the culture, the food, the whole, at least let's put it this way, I like it a lot. I'm not one of those guys that start talking all New Orleans-y when I get there. You ever notice you go on the road with cats and they get to New Orleans and, hey, y'all, let's get us some of this here gumbo. I'm like, bro, you're from New Jersey. You know what I mean? Go get a slice. You know what I mean? Give me that crap. Anyway, how that goes. All right.
All right. So just a couple more questions here. I want to, this is always a hard one for people to answer, but if you had to pick your like Mount Rushmore of influences, who would they be? Your top 5?
Well, it's more than drumming, but I'll do drummers.
Okay.
Well, God. Okay, wait a minute. I'll just do whatever. Okay, drummers, I'm going to have to do this first of all, it would be John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Lee Morgan, what am I doing here? Clifford Brown, Max Roach. I might have gone over the numbers. Man, I'm having a senior moment. Who's the guy from Newark that swings so hard that I love? And
Mobley?
No Room for Squares.
Yeah, Hank Mobley.
Hank Mobley, thank you. Those guys, that would do it, I think. Is that right?
So that would mean all the drummers who played with them would have to be in your top list as well then, right? Or
well, not necessarily. For drummers, it would have to be Art Blakey, Roy Haynes, Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, Max Roach, Art Blakey, Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes, Art Blakey, Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, Max Roach, Roy Haynes. I dig Kluk a lot.
Mm.
Did I leave anybody out of that thing there? Art Blakey,
And
Mac.
Philly Joe, you'd mentioned a few
Oh,
times.
Jones. Oh my God, and Philly Joe. Sorry, bro. Where you are. God, he's actually the one. You know, like so. Even though I don't play like him, he's the cat I find. I love Jimmy Cobb as well. You know, if I start doing drummers, I'm going to have to name about 70.
Yeah, I know that's how it goes, right?
Those guys right there are the main deal for me, I would say.
Now,
Yeah, I do
now,
love.
if you're going to go to your record collection and pick a record right now, what would you throw on?
Um, uh, there's one out there by Sonny Stitt that I don't know the name of that I just found that I had the other day, and it swings so hard it's unbelievable. I'm gonna have to text you and tell you
Okay.
you need to hear this too, and that you probably already have. But this is, it was in my wife's record side of her collection. I'm like, what the hell is this? And I put it on, and I was like floored. I actually played 3 nights with Sonny Stitt, but this is pretty deep, you know. And
Do you know who's on it?
no, I know. I just found it the other day and put it on. It's sitting. Well, I think she might have put it back. She's a stickler for putting it back in because it's vinyl, and she doesn't want the cats to scratch it. But I will find out and let you know. But it's a killer, man. It's
Nice.
just, oh my God, like the pocket is fierce and the whole thing. Uh, uh, I love Lou Donaldson. I mean, God, I love probably all the same guys you do, man. You know what I mean? Like, shoot.
Well, last question is, if you remember, what was your first snare drum?
Gretsch, broadcaster. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had when they didn't even call them round badges in those days, but I had the whole deal that everybody's willing to, give their firstborn for now. I had it. I had a bunch of those, as a matter of fact. I kept buying Gretsch, and I didn't even know why. I just liked it, but it wasn't the hip thing to do yet when I had them. I just, and then, of course, in the late 60s with Tony and everybody and Art Blakey and all that, there was no other drum set for me to have. I did have a Ludwig drum set that I used on a funk organ gig for a while because my Gretsch set was sounding too Gretchy, and so I didn't want to tune them down into the funk department. And this organ player kind of wanted a more of a funky thing, so some guy sold me a Ludwig set, and man, that Ludwig snare was barking, Jack, and it's the one I used on Thrust.
No kidding.
In fact, this is it. I don't use it on gigs anymore, but it's in the practice room.
Oh, shoot. What do you got? Hiding behind the chair. Oh, shoot.
Yeah, that's it. It's the old, it was a super sensitive that some guy before he gave it to me stripped it down and made just a regular old snare out of it.
No kidding. Do you know if that's a brass or an aluminum shell?
Brass.
Aha. That's the sound, everyone. The thrust sound. Chrome over brass. Get it.
So, and now I'm a DW guy, and with the advantage for me to that is the DW drums make me play jazz. They make me play everything like me. If I play I have a old Gretsch set, and if I break those out, I start trying to play like Joe Chambers, or I start reliving my Blue Note collection instead of playing me. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, for sure. Even at the that sounds silly, but you hear it and you start playing it. So I don't use the old Gretchen, and I mean this doesn't work. This is me. I'm just talking about me. So I know like a lot of guys that do, and they don't have that problem. They play fantastic, as a matter of fact. But really, the point of this interview is this bad boy right here. Speakers in the
That's
house.
it. That's it.